I want to begin first by thanking the Serpentine for this possibility. The second is to thank Kazim for his talent, energy, charm, the way in which he has brought so many people together, and the openness and welcomeness with which he creates these forums. And I'm very grateful specifically to be here. I never take for granted the possibility of sharing my thoughts in a public forum, so I'm grateful for that. And the brief today was extremely loose. I got like 5 words, economics of the creative sector. So let's find out what that means to each of us. I don't know, maybe we run across this way. How did you interpret the brief?
I think for me as an architect, my daily thing is fees and dealing with clients and just like project management along the creative side. And it's like, how do you find balance in doing what you love, but not letting it cost your kind of sanity? And how do you not let value engineering kill the initial design intent and let it be something that aesthetically you're proud of, but also the client can afford? So that's the lens that, and also like side projects to keep you going that make nothing with artists that are incredible, but you want to be able to kind of contribute to larger art and culture. And how do you do that and assist them and all that? So those are my 2 minds in this.
I guess what's different, between architecture that I guess leans more into service and I guess the fields in which, I work with Samuel on, which is more so focused on, consumer, is that I interpret it more about how do you create value and how do you look at creating value at scale. And naturally that lends itself to thinking about first principles across maybe different industries, because we work across a bit of industrial design, fashion, luxury, and I guess what really drives the underpinning value within discretionary products. And I guess the businesses that we've had focused mostly on cultural capital as a mediating factor of how you define value.
So let's then think, I guess, if we define or bring the commonalities across these two. The first one is like, what is cultural capital? How do you get it? How do you make it? And the second is, I guess, how do you establish a unique proposition, right? Because that's kind of, as an architect, you don't make, well, let me frame it a different way. Capitalism is make a thing, sell a thing, right? Mm-hmm. Architecture is not really like that, because you don't sell a thing, you sell your time. But what's common across both of them is desire. That's fundamentally the basis of like what any type of consumerism or consumption is. And one of the things that first drew me to the world of fashion, having, as I did at the time, rather a fringe ideological position with regards to like social justice and various other types of redistribution of wealth, etc. What I was amazed by with especially luxury fashion was the way in which desire is created. Like, you've never seen a thing before. You've never seen this shoe. And they show you a picture of the shoe, and you're like, wow, I must have that. It's like, how'd they do that? How would you do that for something like recycling? Like, how do you show someone recycling and have them be like, wow, I love that. I have to be involved in it. So this essence of desire and the way in which you generate desire, I think, is quite central to me. I don't know if you have reflections on that.
Completely. I think luxury is about generating desire, and I think that that's then reflective on the cultural capital. I think when you're thinking about then the opportunity for entrepreneurs within luxury is then looking at, what the difference is between traditional forms on how luxury is being interpreted, because it's very much rooted within European ideologies or something that's more focused on heritage, where then innovation is actually the antithesis to that. So I think that, when I think about, what me and Samuel have worked on, the value proposition of the businesses that we've built is how do we mediate past the traditional forms of heritage and luxury and, pull on also the lever of cultural capital in terms of then redefining what luxury looks like for the more contemporary consumer.
And I think for an architect, in terms of building structures and like public space, like trying to find ways to reclaim that for the communities to represent like their cultures, their backgrounds, and in a way, when we're trying to build new communities, is just what the focus is in a lot of cities around the world right now because of the affordable housing crisis and kind of lack of appropriate housing and even just like creative space for artists and just the lack of space for arts and culture. I think we're ultimately trying to define spaces that belong to the people, and how can we kind of improve the way we live in cities and make them more walkable, more pedestrian friendly. So I think culture in that sense has a lot of kind of like sidebars that need to kind of be discussed, like how do you create culture in architecture and in design as well. I think there's an urgency to it too. So like even when new buildings are going up, you've noticed like there's a big push for like public art. Like how can we get them to engage with the site even before the site is finished? And how can we commission a bunch of artists to create installations? And then it's like that quick also like Instagram thing. Like we need to get them to get excited about what's coming. In a way, that sense of urgency is that kind of, that topic you're saying of just like drawing people in and having that need. But there's pivots in it, and there's a way that you can make it work that it's more beneficial.
One of my party tricks is I take really interesting things that other people are saying and I suck all the fun out of them. So I guess if there's kind of two, let's say, historical frameworks, which I might bring in at this point, one would be the evolution of luxury and the role of cultural capital within it. And if I say that very, very rapidly, essentially, especially within luxury fashion, but the concept of luxury is that it's expensive because there's very little of it available. So it's an industry based on scarcity. And in the late 1990s, when fashion went from being an extremely small and elite group dominated by Western companies and mostly white men creative directors, then there was a question like, how are we going to mass produce things which are by their nature difficult to mass produce? Like, how do you make mass-produced luxury? And if you take an example like Louis Vuitton, you know, you're selling a bag at, let's say, $5,000 that used to cost $2,500 to make. Now you're trying to sell a bag at $5,000 that only costs $50 to make. So how do you maintain that price? How do you convince people to keep paying for it? And it begins, I think, this experiment with Miuccia Prada. I would probably locate it with Prada, but in the early 2000s and accelerating into the 2010s, there was an idea that you can maintain that price difference by cultural capital, by basically establishing the cultural value of the object. And you do that either by building your own cultural capital, so in the case of Prada, they had the Prada Foundation and other institutions have followed that, or you acquire cultural capital. So you find a figure who already has a lot of cultural capital and you make them the creative director. And you know, I think you could probably say that begins with people like Raf and maybe Kim Jones, and then it accelerates through the 2010s. So that's like, I think, one of the fundamental problems of luxury, which is, you know, you need cultural capital in order to sustain those prices, otherwise it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I pause here because the other history goes on also a little bit longer. We'll come back to it.
But do you think like these luxury retail experiences that often go with these pivots of these new directions, like artist collaborations and things that happen for a few months, are a way to like draw people in? But are they effective? Are they helping anyone? How do you kind of feel like this about them?
I think luxury goes beyond just, you know, the fashion houses. I think luxury on its own now, it's a mentality, it's a direction, it's actually also a model that then now, you know, extends across different lifestyle components. You know, you see that with, you know, luxury brands going to experiences, not just the store, but in terms of, you know, they go into F&B, they go into hotels, they go into spas. And I think what you're going to see in the next, you know, advent, or where luxury goes into, is definitely things that are more so geared towards a service-based model. I think because, you know, to your point, Jack, about the scarcity point, we're reaching, you know, a point where scaling the idea of scarcity is inherently going to have its limitations on the actual value of, you know, some of the products that, you know, allow these businesses to continue having, you know, that vanguard, you know, zeitgeist of value, that we're going to start seeing, you know, some of these brands then extend into forms of ubiquity in services. You know, we've already seen it through other components of, you know, lifestyle. So I don't know if it's just something that's purely tied to fashion and fashion houses, or something that we can see across, you know, any discretionary product or consumer brand.
Okay, well, the other thing I was going to say is about the like disappearance of what you would call the civic sphere, which I think relates to what you were describing. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I'm going to answer what you mentioned, which basically civic sphere, you know, on the upside, when you have very hierarchical with you know, media institutions and social institutions with a lot of gatekeeping, you do have like a common social framework. Like when I was growing up, in rural Australia, there were 5 national TV channels. There were only 4 that we got because of the geography of our valley. And when you went to school the next day, there were only like 6 possible TV shows that everyone had seen. Therefore, you have the possibility of mass common culture. That's not the case today, right? So when people say, oh yeah, we want to make public arts, like, who is the public? Well, who are you talking about? Exactly. I don't really know. We're a very fragmented society. Mm-hmm. But specifically to your point around luxury, yeah, I mean, I think obviously post-war in Ukraine and post-COVID, for the 15 years previous to 2021, the luxury sector was ticking along at about 15-16% growth per year. That's now dropped to around 3.5%. Yep. In fact, if any of you are in the apparel or luxury fashion sectors, my suggestion would be that the highest growth sector at the moment is technical apparel. It's seeing around 8.5-9%. So if you're making apparel and you're not making technical apparel, then you're missing a growth opportunity. Don't act on what I'm saying, because I don't want to be responsible for people's business
15 outerwear brands
business plans.
That comes out of this.
But what has happened as a result? Well, when growth dropped from 16 to 3, you saw within about 6 months all of the main. I went to I had the great privilege of going to Milan, Paris, and London fashion weeks, I guess 3 years ago, and I was magnificently underwhelmed. There were some standout shows, but broadly speaking, I was like, wow, this just looks like a series of e-com shoots. It was just like endless product coming down the runway. I was like, man, this proliferation, and it's all aesthetically homogenizing. It's all and then I thought, what's driving that? What's the economics behind that? And I thought, okay, if you're not going to make 16%, you're only going to make 3%. So you start thinking, how can we eat someone else's lunch? So you're like, we don't make puffer jackets. Moncler's like $1 billion company. So if we only can take 1% of Moncler, that'll make up a significant amount of our growth. So we do a Moncler imitation. We smack our logo on it. We're like, hey, the problem with that is everyone did that simultaneously. And so you get every single luxury brand doing every single conceivable product, and they're all homogenizing because they're all trying to eat each other's USP, right? And the effect of that is you end up with a scenario in which fashion is not, on the whole, and I think, that's also driven by a big shift towards e-com generally, which removes ideas of campaign, removes ideas of emotional connection with an audience, and becomes increasingly driven behind product pack shots. It's like, okay, but what's the proposition here? What am I supposed to desire this and be excited by this? I don't really feel that on the whole. So I definitely feel that homogenization of luxury is a big problem, and the effect of it is that it's losing, luxury fashion especially, is losing the prominence that it had taken over the art world in the last 10 years as the center of cultural production. And if it gives up being the center of cultural production, I don't know what's going to come next, who's going to take that spot. Anyway, sorry, I've been going on for a while.
I think it's totally on the nose, because I feel as though that industry is kind of hemorrhaging in a way. We have to reinvent not just the business model, but the circular economy of it, of just material-wise, there's nothing more we can do to keep killing the planet. So looking at just the basis of the fashion industry itself is an issue. And I mean, it'd be good to talk. We have to touch on it because it's affecting us. It's affecting our water and air and things. So I think it's important to talk about the climate aspects of it, but also the globalization of availability of fashion. I feel like every single luxury district, no matter where you are in the world, whether Middle East or in North America, look identical. It's the same store selling the same exact product. And I don't think that resonates with the consumer anymore. I don't know. How do you both feel about that?
I think, again, what you both have said, of course, it's, true for the rapid growth of the industry. But I think within that, there is, like you said, Farida, reflective on the consumer wants something else and something different. And it's no more different than in any other decade where the shift in what a consumer wants has to be reflective of the times. And therein lies then opportunity, I guess, for other creatives to be able to have new perspectives within the industry. Now, of course, it's still, it gets more and more difficult as an industry matures to be able to be an entrepreneur or have a business at scale. I think maybe swinging it back, it'd be good to understand from you, the both of you, on what your experiences have been, and maybe scaling an idea, scaling a business, and how you've how your experiences have been with that.
I'm a terrible businessman. I only really got one company, and it's been quite successful accidentally,
great,
and it makes
Let's
no
plug
money.
the review.
Yeah. I make a magazine, but it has. I've never paid myself any money from it, and it's its circulation is great, but it's a completely non-financial activity, which was dumb. But ideology, right, it can be powerful. But to kind of come back to what you were saying, I think the essence of that, and maybe the overlap between the three of us, is you're absolutely right about. So let's talk about the creative sectors. Let's be specific about the production of contemporary cultural capital, because as the economy goes down, there's less opportunity for people. There's more competition between people, and structural inequalities come to the fore much more. So you're seeing, especially I've noticed within like famous actors in the UK, increasingly they come from wealthy families. And I've noticed that if you want to be an artist, increasingly you have to come from specific types of backgrounds, right? So that's not good. But, and there's nothing wrong with, let's say you're born into a wealthy family. My experience of the ultra rich is they have such an abstract reality that in some ways it gives them an incredible remove from day-to-day world, which gives them like sometimes moments of incredible clarity over what is happening in the world. On the whole, though, the difficulty with coming from an elite background is that you can't speak to mass culture or to mass experience because you don't have a frame of reference for that. And also some of the things which are required to make contemporary culture, the two things which you both mentioned, one is urgency, and the other one I would say is relevance. It's very hard to be urgent or relevant when you don't have the type of feedback loop from time which comes with not having enough money. When you don't have any money, if you don't make a deadline, it has a real impact on what you do. And if you don't feel those types of pressures, you can produce amazing cultural works. Like you can produce incredible artworks and so on, but it's very hard to produce something which feels very contemporary and very urgent. And so in a way, my question back to both of you is, what do you think creates urgency? What do you think creates the idea of the contemporary and the idea of relevance? Easy questions.
You go ahead.
How you create urgency. I think
Hans Ulrich is obsessed by it, I should say.
about urgency.
Everything's always very urgent with
Everything
Hans Ulrich.
everything is very urgent though,
Is it though? There's a lot of stuff where I'm like, this isn't urgent.
That's why I had difficulty with it. I'm like, is it really urgent? What are we responding to? Like, are we responding to the need from the public? They need to see something ideologically, like, forward-thinking, future-proof, like, get people excited about what is to come? Or
You tell me.
yeah.
It's the gaps in secular culture that create urgency, I would argue. And
Yeah.
The ideology surrounding the artist historically has always been the replacement of like
a provocateur, yeah.
the philosopher, right? So you could argue that because we're in such a modernised secular culture, there are so many gaps
Yep.
tied to being able to catalyse or bring newness from like a spiritual standpoint.
For the benefit of those at the back, could I get you to summarize perhaps and add your own thoughts to what Samuel was saying?
Samaros has entered the dialogue. Yeah, I guess we talk about, the gaps in culture. I think what we've, spoken a lot about is that cultural value is generational. There is no, overall standard across every culture, every generation that underpins, what value is. And that then, lays itself to then the opportunity for there to always be, a different perspective, a new perspective that then allows, culture to then, necessitate. I think it's the urgency part is quite interesting when we're talking about an idea or we're talking about, discretionary product. I think that just comes down to, again, what the actual end case of a business that, or creative practice someone wants to have. You talk about a bit about, your practice, Jack, and it's something that I guess, we see as like, a passion project or something you want to continue that doesn't necessarily have like a financial point.
Who needs money, right?
You do need money very much. I'm not naive about that at all. I grew up with not very much money, so I'm very aware of that. But also, often people who grow up without much money, some people become very obsessed by money. And in my case, I have like a real disdain for it because I saw how people with money were treated differently from people without money. Since I was someone without money, I was like, well, what's up with that? But that's a side point.
Yeah.
I think I'm quite interested by this idea of whether or not there are universal human values. I believe there are. I had a crazy dream during the pandemic. In the year 2000, in real life, I went to the Sydney Olympics, and in my dream, I was going to the Sydney Olympics, and I was waiting for my mom, but my mom was like 40, and she was like, yeah, we have to wait for your grandmother before we can go into the stadium. I was like, cool, cool. So then my grandmother arrives, and she's a woman of 40, and she says, yeah, before we can go in, we have to wait for my mom. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. So then her mom arrives, and she's also like 40-year-old woman. We go into the stadium, which I know sits like 100,000 people, and they're all everyone else's mom, right? And I woke up, I was like, wow, prophetic. 10,000, 100,000 generations of humanity, each one is what someone else's mom, and all coming down to me, right, entering. I was like, about a quarter of the people in there were black as well. It was like, so when I think about the history of humanity, it is certainly the case that if you go back around 150, 200,000 years, when we're all living in Africa, we're all in the Rift Valley, we're all basically from Mozambique, also maybe a little bit Zim. But at that time, there are definite human qualities which emerge, which I think are universal to our species. So, for example, I think all humans have a strong sense of fairness. We all think that fairness is very important. We also think equality is important. I think all humans fundamentally think that all humans are born equal. I mean, I'm not talking about like the people who work out how to profit from those systems through hierarchy and power and so on. But at the core, eventually those systems always topple because humans have a strong feeling towards equality. So I'm like, okay, well, if that can be the case, and we could pick other things like, the importance of family. I mean, the number of times I've gone to a society and I'm like, what is it about your society? And they're like, family is very important for us. It's like, do you think family is not important for your neighbors? I mean, that's an insane thing to say. But these types of values, I think, emerged probably before humans spread around the planet. So I do believe there are universal human values which are based on the structure of our societies and the structure of our relationships at that time. Anyway, that's nothing to do with cultural capital.
Do you want to get back to it?
How do you build cultural capital?
For you.
For me, personally?
Give your perspective.
Well, I think that anyone who's too focused on building cultural capital cannot have cultural capital. I'm not cool. I've never been cool, and I don't aspire to be cool. And in some ways, that makes me the coolest person I know. Because I think not pursuing something directly, basically my number one, like I very rarely give advice, but my number one advice to anyone in the creative sector is you have to do something because you are compelled, because you love it, because it is integral to your being. Like the reason I started Real Review was because I was compelled to do it. I couldn't not do it, and I'm forced to do it. And the business model is awful, and it's caused many difficulties because of its existence and so on, but I'm compelled. And so I think people who try to, you can feel it. It's what we often call authenticity, but like you can feel when something's not authentic because someone's trying to build cultural capital or create sway or develop clout. It's like if you're really focused on the craft of what you're doing, on the quality and the specifics in that message, people will be drawn to it. It will resonate with them, and you will generate cultural capital through that. And how you develop your own particular, unique perspective is very much an open question. I have no idea. I mean, I'd be very curious about how you think about that.
No.
Or if you agree with what I've said.
I totally agree. I think for me, and I've been having these discussions really lately a lot, is just like, in architecture, at least when you kind of graduate from school, there's like this perspective that, you're going to change the world and what office will allow you to do that, right? And then you kind of get tied into this vision and ethos of a practice of a leader, per se, if you go with a star architect, or if you go into a practice that's kind of more so larger, that is, been established and they have partners and kind of associate structures, and those also have kind of like their mission statement of what they're contributing to the public, to the community, to cities. And so I think lately what I've seen is a departure from that, where there's a search for authenticity to defining like your personal identity, this reconnection to kind of what I guess you're composed of as a person and how did you become that, your social background. And I think even you've been resonating about like how did you come here today to become this person speaking on the stage. It's like a lot of that foundational values from your family is what kind of defines you when you do kind of expand yourself into whatever realm or practice it is that you're excited about, whether it's creativity or design. And so I think for me, I've been exploring that because I think that's the only way that you can really contribute truly, is if you're really in sync with who you are and how, what energies you expel outward so that you can attract that energy back to you. And I've been surrounding myself with creatives that also are kind of exploring that as well, which has been like super like nourishment from every round. And I feel like it's taken me a long time to understand that that's what essentially life is, like finding freedom and surrounding yourself with good people. And then from that, I've noticed that my creativity has just been like brimming and like everything has been flowing because it just feels like you're doing things with intention rather than kind of reacting to what the trends are or like what the direction of what your career should look like, whether it's successful or whether it's making money, but you're happy. And I think essentially that's like the best advice to anyone that's kind of traversing into a practice or into anything that you're really passionate about.
No, I completely agree. Like, of course, it's not something that's, singular. It's a dialogue. But I think what you both touched on is, again, only through that, authentic, pursuit of, what your interest and what your perspective is, then you have, then you start to attract or have the right dialogues within that broader, creative community. And I think that community then the creator and then consumer becomes then almost all part of especially that initial growth of, I guess, when a creative practice starts to then veer towards, a business or like an output.
Maybe I would say something about freedom. I really want to be free. I've spent my whole life pursuing different ideas of freedom. And for a long time, I thought that meant what you would call autonomy, which is the ability to initiate things yourself and be in control of yourself. And what I've come to understand about freedom is it's not like that at all. Maybe the best metaphor for it I can give is before the Europeans arrived in North America, amongst the Native American groups, from one side to the other, you've got 10,000 plus different types of society, but they all had certain kind of common rules amongst them. And one of them was that if a stranger arrives in your town, you have to host them. So if you want to talk about the freedom of movement, right, you could, if you lived in present-day San Diego and you wanted to walk to present-day New York, you could do that because every couple of days you would reach a new tribe and they would host you and they would take care of you. So your freedom of movement is contingent on the support that everyone else provides you within that context. And you have an obligation as well, which is if someone comes to your town and you host them, right? So it's a reciprocal idea of support. And what I've come to understand is you can only be free within systems of mutual support. You cannot be free outside of them. And so when I see people who are really, striving to be like unique individuals and to define themselves outside of anything else, it's like that's not how it works. In fact, you have to build up your entire community collectively as a series of mutual obligations and mutual responsibilities, and that's how you achieve freedom within it. And that, I think, also applies to like what you might call kind of traditional business logic, which is you only exist at the grace of your consumer, which is your audience, which is your community. So if you're disrespectful to them, if you don't treat them well, then they will have no loyalty to you, and then everything will collapse. So in a way, it's like fostering that idea of reciprocal care is very key to ideas of freedom for me.
I think about more also the practical components of freedom for creative as well, and thinking about also knowing what your intellectual property, however it's defined across your discipline, and how you also protect that. I think again, if we talk about shifting from a creative practice into a business, being able to protect that freedom is also something that is highly important.
Yeah, I think freedom comes in all forms of like being able to select who you work with. That's an ultimate luxury when you're starting a practice or starting a sort of business. And then I think also just like the longevity to be able to stop and walk away from it too. Like I think sometimes a lot of creatives and some people that, you get lauded as successful, you get caught up in something that is moving so quickly that you can't keep up. And you're excited because this is what success looks like, but it also is draining you of your kind of mental resources. And how do you build up a team fast enough to sustain it so that you can focus on the the direction, the initial intent of what the practice or business was supposed to be, without kind of killing yourself in the process of just not of doing too much. And I think you see that a lot with creatives just being drained because they have to respond to the need, that urgency that we talked about earlier. And I'm just curious, like, what can we do to create more structure for that, or what can we say I guess on here of like the tools to prepare you for that? I don't know.
Well, now I guess we're into like the essential typologies of different working practices within the creative sector. So you've got, I think there's many different nuances to this, but broadly speaking, I think there's two main kind of approaches to entering into the creative sector. One is to enter into an established system and to work your way up that system. And the other is to essentially what I would call like a Robin Hood or cross-subsidization model, in which you do one thing and that's how you make your money and provide yourself with financial security. And the thing that what you describe as a passion project, but which may actually be your kind of true cultural interest, is something which is not financially viable within society today, right? And they're the kind of two models. And they come with terrible consequences in both cases, because if you go into the mainstream, first there's the whole problem of how to enter into the mainstream, and each different creative discipline has very strict established order for how you do that. So, you know, within the art world, for example, eventually you have to be represented by a famous gallery. In order to do that, you have to have a show at an institution. In order to do that, you have to have a reasonable gallerist, which means you have to have done a lesser show, and so on. So you kind of tic-tac up this system. In the world of music, it's slightly different. In architecture, it's different entirely again. But yeah, you're faced with these various kind of gatekeepers and barriers, which for me has always been very difficult because I hate asking for permission. I don't want someone to tell me what I can and can't do. But that's the trade-off, right? So you either go into the established situation where you have very limited control over your freedom of what you do, but you tend to have quite good financial security depending on what the industry is. And the other is you do what you're interested in which case you have total control over what you do, but you have no financial security whatsoever. And yeah,
I think
that's the scenario.
I think more optimistically, that's, a mediation of both. I think any business, even if you go down the entrepreneurial route, you still have to deal with the stakeholders of the incumbents. It's only through working. There's no way of, continuing necessarily, growing something through an independent vertical. I think what's interesting about creatives is also looking at the two different types of, models that they may be. One that is, like you said, your passion project, your name, your image and likeness that you want to, continue. And also potentially also having creative pursuits where you do see a financial transaction or an endpoint, and almost not necessarily be slightly detached, but really understanding what that value proposition of that business is, and not tying that so closely to your self-identity, because we all will, age and have different interests, as we, age. And is it necessary that the business reflects, our personal ambitions or how we age? I don't know. I think that there's two different types of creative businesses that may be, because, if not, you do a disservice to the actual business if it needs to always encapsulate everything tied to your own self-identity.
Yes.
That's exactly where I'm at right now. So I spent 10 years trying to create a business which was very challenging. It was a post-capitalist business, and turns out capitalism doesn't want to pay for post-capitalism. And at the end of 10 years, I was like, sorry?
It's a capitalism. I think it's staying.
It's what?
It's staying.
It's staying. No, it's almost gone, actually. It's already morphing beyond anything that... I mean, after 2030, I don't think anyone born in the 20th century will recognize our economic model as capitalist. It would be my argument. And but this is a separate point. What I wanted to get to was like how that model that you're describing actually plays out. So in my case, I was like, okay, right. What have I got in my arsenal? What are the resources that I have at my disposal, and what's the knowledge that I've got? So I did a kind of like tallying up of everything to work out then what is my potential? What can I do? And I thought about it in the following way, which was, capitalism is make a thing, sell a thing, right? So what are you going to make? What are you going to sell? Now, the problem is the only thing I ever made was a magazine, which I can sell, but I make no money from it. So that's not a good thing to make and sell. So what can I make and sell that's going to provide me with the financial security to give me the artistic and creative autonomy to pursue other things which are important to me, and as in fact many people in this space have done themselves, give even the ability to give money back to other people who want to start their own thing and so on. So you follow a particular process which is very straightforward. First, you have to identify a particular context which you want to address, and you could call this a problem. And you have to be very clear about what that problem is, and then you have to develop what you might call a kind of solution, which is how you're going to address that condition, what is really needed within that context. Then that turns into a product, which is, if it has to be one thing, what is that thing going to be that is going to address that particular problem that you've identified? And then, of course, you do an analysis of market opportunity. How many people have this problem, and how much do you think they're willing to pay for your solution? And then that defines your product, your market. It tells you how much the thing can cost. It tells you how much your potential in terms of selling it is. And then you can set out a business plan for how to develop that thing and then sell it to those people. And that's where I'm at right now. I had an idea, and I'm now going to try and execute against it.
Yeah, I think for me, in my background, I spent a lot of time in a corporate architecture firm, 8 years. And from that model, the business model was really like, the client is always right. They come here with the money, and we build what they ask. And aesthetic isn't really an initiative. We're here to keep the lights on and make sure that work keeps coming in from said client. And then from there, I pivoted to more of a boutique firm that has its very distinct aesthetic and really focused on design. And the client will never tell us what to do, which in that model, in aspect, was really fulfilling because we defined what aesthetically things look like, the finished product, the design intent, and they had to trust the process, which was really freeing and felt great. And now I'm in kind of a mixed bag situation where it's the smallest firm I've kind of worked with, but I'm a director and I have more stake and I have ownership and I have to bring in work. So I get to select my clients, but I have to be very careful about the projects we bring in because there's like the meat and potato projects. Like you're never going to be fulfilled, but they keep the lights on and we have to do them because this is what we're known for. So larger kind of urban design, master planning, city-focused things that are more logistical planning, zoning. They're not fancy, fun things, but we pepper them with really great artistic collaborations and just like smaller pavilion structures, things that will kind of keep the masses happy, especially the office happy, especially the younger generation that's in our practice, and then finding opportunities to kind of pivot. But fees and making money are kind of at the basis and core of every practice, and so I find a lot of disjointed things happening where I'm trying to do a lot of things outside of practice that fulfill me, because you in architecture, and I think in any studio right now, there's a huge pivot in just kind of going after work. It doesn't matter what type of work it is, and everyone's competing for the same type of work, whether you're a small firm or a large firm. But I'm finding the larger firms are trying to eat the smaller firms a little bit too, like bringing them in as like joint ventures, collaborators, because they feel that there's a new energy that they're not finding within their studios anymore, because the younger generation, I feel, are more flexible and want to work for the smaller, not be paid as much, but they want to be fulfilled. And I don't think you can be fulfilled in a room of 150, 300 people. I think you can be fulfilled in a room of 10 and 15 or even 5, where you're working on one-on-one with people that give you the time and the energy. So I'm just trying to replicate that in the aspects of kind of where we're saying the future is going with this. Like, will practice still look the same 5 years from now, or 2030, which is like our marker of success, I guess? What are we aiming for practice to look like?
Yeah, I guess there's just, different models. I guess my background is that I met my business partner whilst I was studying law, and then decided to take a gap year, and then that necessitated into then, running the 2 businesses that we've had. But from an entrepreneur standpoint, there's always, different models that you can embark on based on, the context. So the first business that we had was very much focused on getting venture funding, really very cognizant on the, I guess, cultural capital the business had at that time, And scale was definitely an underpinning factor of that first business. Now, the second time around, with the second business that we had, that is then, more so focused on, again, scale, but definitely, dictating the pace of that and finding ways that we're able to then create, intellectual property that can definitely, extend past, the short term. And I think those are the things that, I guess, we're definitely more focused about.
It's 10 seconds past 3 o'clock, which means our time is up. If I conclude in reflection to what it is, we have answered none of the questions in some ways about what like the economics of the creative sector are.
But it was fun.
But it was enjoyable. I hope it was enjoyable for you as it was for us. I guess the final thing I would say is the importance of financial literacy. Like learn the systems that other people are using in order to succeed. Because it turns out people who are involved in economics and finance are not geniuses, and but they hold a lot of very important knowledge. Anyway, I conclude there by thanking again Kazim and the Serpentine, and thanking you all for coming as well.
Jeez.